discover the secret ingredients of an effective training program. Before we get started, let me acknowledge friends from India, Canada, the UK, and other locations throughout the world who have joined us. And let me offer a special welcome to new friends in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf States region who have tuned in. Let me start by saying that every company in every industry and in every country throughout the world has a training program. Some have very formalized programs with a lot of people working on the staff. Others may say they don't have programs, but they really do. They are simply not managing them, and they have no idea what the costs are because the costs are embedded in confusion, errors, redos, lost productivity, and safety incidents. The fact is that they're not managing these programs, and they don't know what they're actually costing them. The question is now, does the effective training program, does your training program contain the secret ingredients that make it effective? And that's what we're going to talk about today, is those secret ingredients that make a training program effective. Now you've read, or you heard the nice introduction I had. I worked in the United Space Alliance. I developed a technical training program for the Ascent Flight Design Group. That's the group of 90 engineers that handled the first 10 minutes of shuttle flight. I worked at Energen, a Shell Bechtel energy joint energy venture, developed a technical training program for them. Also worked in the regulatory arena and developed in-house training, in-house online training development for El Paso Corporation. I currently, with Kinder Morgan, work more in the regulatory arena than in the training arena right now. The author of 2 books, and I currently research, write, speak, and consult on topics of supportive workplace environments, organizational culture, employee engagement, safety, productivity, and sustainable profitability. What we're going to talk about today is learning the 6 key elements of an effective training program. We're going to discover why they are essential and how they relate to each other. And what's often missing in a discussion of technical training program development is a discussion of the organizational factors that impact the success of such a training program. Now we're facing quite a challenging future. We have new technology. There's artificial intelligence that is combining with big data, with Internet of Things and wearable technology that is gathering information about an organization from all variety of sources and combining it to feed information to upper management, to workers in the field. And that is creating a whole new arena for work. Plus, we have a new generation of workers that have a different view of work than previous generations. They are challenging the workplace, they're challenging the work organizations to provide them the training, to provide them the guidance they need to develop their careers. Combining these 2 elements, the workplace is changing. And we have one tool, one primary tool to address that: training. Now, training has actually just one goal, a single goal. Workers perform tasks safely, properly, and efficiently. Training provides that. Training helps workers perform tasks safely, properly, and efficiently. And when that works, the safety of the organization increases and the productivity of the organization increases. And when those 2 things increase, then the stability, the sustainability of the organization also increase and are assured. When we look at training, training does one thing and one thing only. It improves competencies. Competencies are skills knowledge, and comprehension. Skills are the ability of someone to perform a task. Knowledge are the ability to retain and state facts. Comprehension is the ability to understand and explain a concept. When those things happen, when those things occur through training, then we can increase safety, we can do other things. We can increase safety, we can increase productivity, we can increase efficiency, and our workforce is more adaptable as their skill base, as their competency base increases. So training does just this one thing, but through doing that one thing, we can accomplish other things that we want with the organization. Now, the key program elements, the key elements of a training program are tasks, competencies, and those feed into learning objectives, evaluation criteria, which are founded upon a task, condition, and standard statement. We're going to go into those in more detail. The learning objectives drive the design and delivery of the learning experience. The evaluation criteria drive the design and delivery of the evaluations. Pulling all these elements together, tasks come from a breakdown of the work. We have employees performing work. They perform particular tasks. We identify those tasks by an action and object. We identify the competencies, the skills, knowledge, and comprehension that someone needs to perform those tasks, and then those competencies drive how we deliver the training and how we do an evaluation of whether the training has provided those competencies. So these 6 items combined represent the foundational elements of a training program. Let's look at each one individually. Tasks. I see tasks in various programs defined in lots of different ways, but the proper way to do it is that you have an action and an object. The action is an action verb. The object can be categorized in the areas of equipment, facilities, procedures, personnel, documents. And as an example, our action is install and our object a ball valve. So install a ball valve, and you note on the lower portion of the screen, identify a dictionary of actions and a dictionary of objects. It's very useful when you identify the verbs and the objects to document those. We call it documented in a dictionary, so that when you reuse that verb, you're using it with the same definition, that you define it when you initially use it in the program, and then as you use it consistently throughout the program, you use it with that same definition. Plus, having the dictionary, you know when you've added something new to the program. So it's a way to help manage how many elements of training you're dealing with and how many elements of evaluations. The training and evaluations would coincide. Now, competencies, as I mentioned before, skills, knowledge, comprehension. Skills are the ability to perform a task, and I'd add to that properly, safely, and efficiently. Knowledge, the ability to state a fact. Comprehension, the ability to explain a concept. These differentiate in how they're delivered, and they differentiate in how they're evaluated, which is useful to identify them individually. Perform a task might be the install of the valve. Knowledge might be know the different parts of the valve. Comprehension might be explain why the valve works the way it does. These competencies should always be observable and measurable. And they can be, depending on the size of your program and the complexity, they can be at different levels. They could be a novice level. You could have a whole set of tasks, competencies that are defined at a novice level, and then have another set that are experienced level with more detail, more challenge, and then you could have also a set at the expert level if you so desired. Now, the learning objectives are defined by a task, condition, and a standard. The task, just as we stated before, an action and an object. Now, the condition describes the condition under which you want the employee to perform the task. It might have to do with the environment, it might have to do with the access to tools, it might have to do with other conditions. And the standard is the acceptable level of performance. As an example of a learning objective, be able to install a ball valve under field conditions at an expert level. Now, field conditions and expert level seem pretty high level and abstract, but you could define that. You could define what does it mean to be at the under field conditions. Does that mean that any conditions that an employee would run into in their normal line of work? It could be. And the expert level, that would also have to be defined. So you'd have more detail in your program that defined what these two terms meant. Now, the learning experience is how we deliver those competencies. And that could be with online learning, it could be with classroom instruction, simulation. We're getting more into the virtual reality and augmented reality arena, or on-the-job training. One thing, and I'll repeat this later on, one thing that you want to keep in mind in terms of a learning experience is the closer the learning experience is to the actual work that somebody performs, the more it sticks in their brain. So on-the-job training should be taken very seriously and not be just kind of a toss out of go work with this person and follow them around and watch what they do on a particular day. On-the-job training should be just as well thought out as any other element of training because it's the most effective type of training. It's usually one-on-one, so it's more expensive than other types of training. But just keep that in mind. The closer training is to the actual work, the more effective it is. Now, on the evaluation side, the evaluation criteria, similar to the learning objectives, are driven by task, condition, and standard. Again, action and object is a task. Conditions, the environment, tools, other conditions. Standard, acceptable performance of level. So this could be install a ball valve under field conditions at an expert level. This sounds very similar to the learning objectives, as it should be, because the task, the learning objectives, and the evaluation criteria need to be linked, and they're linked by this terminology. Now, the evaluation, that can be performed in a variety of ways. Can be a performance observation, can be a simulation, can be an interview session, written test. The performance evaluation observation tends to apply more to the performance arena. Simulation, also performance arena. The interview session tends to apply to comprehension, and the written test tends to apply more to knowledge. So some combination of these is probably always going to be used in verifying a particular competency or performance of a task. These things need to be tied together. As I mentioned before, tasks are derived from a breakdown of the work, identifying all the work that someone performs. Competencies spill out from the tasks. The task condition standard statement drive learning objectives and evaluation criteria, and the learning experience is a result of having defined what we want to provide, what experience we want to provide, and what competencies we want to impart to someone. And the evaluation is driven by the evaluation criteria. These things need to be linked in this manner. So it's useful if you just kind of memorize this chart and burn this into your consciousness that these are the connections that an effective training program needs to have and maintain. Just a little reinforcement on this task, condition, and standard statement. It applies to both the learning objectives and the evaluation criteria. And it's what am I performing, what am I doing, under what conditions, and to what level of quality or standard. Example, again, install ball valve under field conditions at an expert level. Now, in developing these, we would typically start by identifying the various roles in the organization and identify then what tasks do the people in these roles perform. Management, operations, users, maintenance, IT, we've got a lot of roles, and there's a lot more than I've listed here. But think in that direction of who's doing the work and what work are they doing. So what do they do? In thinking those terms, then for a particular task, there may be different levels of how they approach that task. Operations, the people in operations, the people out in the field, or the offices may be the ones performing the task, but we may have supervisors and various levels of management that need to know about that task. They need to know something about how it's performed. They may not actually have to do it themselves, but they need to know that task exists, and that may be another level of training that applies to them. Maintenance and repair needs to approach the task from a different direction. So a particular task, there may not just be one instance of training for that. It may be in context of who is performing that task or who needs to know what about that task. Now, for a given organization, we're going to have a lot of tasks. Even a small size organization has a lot of tasks that they perform. So it's useful to categorize and prioritize those tasks. The categories, we could put them in the various business units, what facilities perform these tasks, what disciplines those tasks fall into, what positions they're aligned with, what regulatory mandates are associated with those tasks, any hazards and risks. And then we need to prioritize, because there's just too many to do them all at once unless you have just a huge staff. And in most cases, you don't. In most cases, you'll have a few staff that set the program up or operate the program, and so it's useful to prioritize. And usually, the high risk, the hazards, and risk category are the ones that you want to address first, and then you identify some critical tasks, critical operations tasks that drive the success of the organization. But there's a variety of ways that you can prioritize them, but prioritizing is certainly a useful way to approach managing the volume of tasks that you would have. Now, the competencies then are derived from the task, as we mentioned, and so the learning comes next. Is how do we want to impart that knowledge to the individuals? And that's through the learning experience. So having identified the competencies and the learning objectives, then that gives us a way to put a ballpark, put some parameters on what the learning looks like, what we're actually going to include in the learning, and what we need to leave out of it because that's not relevant. As I mentioned before, training and work, the closer the training is to the actual work experience, the more impact it has on the individual. So it's useful to keep that in mind, to keep that in mind. Even though it may be classroom instruction, keep in mind what conditions the person in the field is working under and build that into the training experience. Then how it's verified. You want to know what the people are doing on the job. That's the first step. Then you want to identify what it is that they need to learn, figure out how to integrate that into the training process, and then you want to verify. You want to have a way to test that they've actually learned what you wanted to learn and they're able to use that on the job. We have performance observations, simulations, interview session, written test. These first two, performance observation and simulation, tend to lend best to verifying performance competencies. The interview session tends to lend towards verifying comprehension, and the written test tends to verify the knowledge component. We put all those together, then you start to see an overview of how you would develop the elements of this training program, how you would keep these 6 factors in line. And the learning objectives are embedded within this process, and the evaluation criteria are embedded within this. So we have 6 then. Let's look at this once again as an overview. In identifying the tasks, we want to document those in a dictionary of actions and objects. So we have a record of what, an easily accessible record of what task we've identified, what the verbs mean, how we're using those verbs and the objects within the program, and what that actually means. And then we also have a way to identify if we're adding something new to the program, then we add something new to the dictionary as well. The competencies, we want to identify and document those and keep them linked to the tasks, because the tasks are the work that's being performed. So the competencies need to be linked to the work that people perform, and they're linked through the tasks. Then we have the learning objectives and the evaluation criteria that are defined, that are based on a task, condition, standard statement. The learning objectives feed into the learning experience. The learning experiences, we need to have those defined, staffed, and the materials produced for the program. The evaluation criteria feeds into the evaluation, and we need the evaluations defined, staffed, the evaluators, and the materials produced to make that work. This is starting to produce then positions, materials, classes, things like that. And we need some place for those to reside in a organized fashion. So typically a learning management system would be installed, configured, and operational to manage these connections and make sure that they stay connected. One of the problems that many training programs encounter is that all these things may be connected when they first start, when the program is first set up. But over time, as things are added and things are changed, as the workplace conditions change and the program should change and can along with that, then some of these things fall out of sequence. They're not maintained. These connections are not maintained. When that happens, then you're delivering a learning experience that may not actually train somebody to do the task that is connected with the work that they're doing. The evaluation, if that falls out of sequence, then you may be evaluating somebody on a set of criteria, but those criteria may not be in sync with the tasks and with the work that they're actually doing. So you're not able to verify that the training experience is going to improve their productivity and their ability to perform the tasks safely and efficiently. So it's useful to have these, to monitor and to keep these things all linked together. Now, what's not often talked about in terms of developing training is the arena in which the training occurs. So the structure, the organization, what's going on in the organization. And 2 components that need to be looked at. One is a functional managerial structure. Certain things in the organization need to work effectively for the training to work. A cultural awareness. You need to have an awareness of what the culture in the organization is that you're inserting a training program or operating a training program within, and how conducive that is to the type of training and the training that you're delivering. So let's look at these 2. First, the functional managerial structure. The key elements of that are an effective authority and accountability framework. Now we have an org chart. Each element within each position on that org chart has to have clearly defined authority and accountability. And often, as I mentioned with the training program, when an organization is first set up, these things may be well defined. But as the organization progresses through time, positions are added, positions are changed. There may be confusion inserted in that process, as to who's really accountable for what. So it's important, it's almost imperative that the organization monitor this on an ongoing basis so that it's clearly defined who is responsible for what work and that they're held accountable for it. Now, the problem that you would encounter is suppose you train somebody to perform a particular task, but they're in a role that they're uncertain as to whether they actually perform those tasks, whether they're actually responsible for them, or whether somebody else is, or there's confusion in that process. Then that degrades the effectiveness of the training. When these things are very clear, then the training can be applied and increase the effectiveness of the person in that position. When these things are not clear, then confusion may reign. Communications channels, that's both communications top down and bottom up. Those communications need to be clear and honest communications. The bottom up, the feedback, is giving upper management a look at what the reality is out in the line, what the workers are actually experiencing, and the problems they may be encountering. And those problems then may identify areas where they need training or training would be useful to them. It may be just also organizational issues that management needs to take a look at, but the communications need to be clear top down and the bottom up feedback that's so essential to keeping an organization effective. Now, in the area of cultural awareness, I modified this chart, borrowed it from Professor Patrick Hudson, who developed a safety culture ladder for the Shell organization in the early 90s. And this identifies 5 different levels that the organizational culture might reside at. Bottom level is we don't do training at all. The top level is training as part of our operation. Now within that, moving up a step from the bottom level, we don't do training, is we do training but only for mandates. So only if the government, federal agencies or state agencies mandate that we do training, then we do it. But otherwise we don't. So we're only do it if we're forced to do it. We do training to fix problems. So only if we run into a problem do we do training. We do training to address change. That's a higher level. It's getting closer to an actual training organization or an organization that uses training as a strategic partner. And that's where training is most effective, is when it's used, when it's a part of the operation, when it's an integral part of the operation, and it's used as a strategic partner for the operation. It's important to identify which level you're at, because you can't jump from 1 to 5 in just one step. You move up this ladder or you move down this ladder. Hopefully you move up. Also, in terms of cultural awareness, it's useful to identify or know in the training that you're delivering, is the training designed to change the individual's behavior, or is it designed to change the organizational behavior? And how you would approach that would be different. The individual, maybe you're wanting just to improve their performance, but maybe you've integrated, in terms of the organization, maybe you've integrated a whole new process into an organization, and that way, and with that, then you want to change and alter the behavior of that entire organization. So it's useful to know, as the training professional, whether you're intending to impact a single individual with your training or the entire organization. Now, the training, as I mentioned, does one thing. It changes, it improves competencies. So we're addressing an individual, one individual at a time, but the way we address a group of individuals, one individual at a time, can impact an entire organization. And it's useful to have that in mind as to what the goal of the delivery of the training is, to change one individual's behavior or to change the entire organization. As I mentioned, we have a different future ahead. We've got new technology, the challenges of new technology. We've got the challenges of a new generation. The workplace will change. And training is our tool that can make that change in a smooth and effective manner if training is viewed as a strategic partner. So in looking at the secret ingredients of an effective training program, first is maintaining these links: the tasks, competencies, learning objectives, learning experience, evaluation criteria, and evaluations. Maintaining that association of training and evaluations to the actual work is key. It's a key secret ingredient of an effective training program. Additionally, is having that program operated within a managerial structure that is functional. The more you reduce the confusion within an organization, the more effective the training is going to be. So how on top of things the organization is, how leading edge they are in their performance, that's going to impact how well the training works in that organization. And then having a cultural awareness, knowing where your organization is in terms of its view of training and how it behaves in terms of training, is extremely useful in knowing what your expectations should be and how you can drive those expectations, advance them more toward a strategic partnership of training and upper management in the various operations organizations. It's been my pleasure to spend this time with you, and let me just say that before we get to questions, that feel free to email me at fred_Stawitz@kindermorgan.com. Be happy to continue this discussion with any of you. Also connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions that I can address, and particularly in terms of supportive work environments, organizational culture, employee engagement, safety, productivity, and sustainable profitability, then feel free to call me. If you have any questions about what we've talked about in this seminar, feel free to drop me a note, and I'll be happy to get back to you. We'll now open it up to questions.
Thank you very much for such a fascinating presentation, folks. We are now open for the question answers. If you have any question, you can either put in the question box given in the end of the webinar console, given at the end of the webinar, and equally you could raise your hands by clicking on the hand icon available on the webinar console. So let me go straight towards the question. We have a question for you, Mr. Fred, that is how we can involve talent in the coach selection process.
Say that once more. How we can involve talent in
coach selection process.
Oh, I'm not sure I quite understand that question. Is particularly if you have a very lean or small staff on the training administration side of the equation, what's useful to do is to define subject matter experts in the field that in various organizations, and through working through management, recruit them as experts that help you develop the expertise that's required to say these are the competencies that are needed on to perform a particular task. The training staff in the training program, unless you want to invest a lot of money in the program itself, the staff aren't going to be the experts on a lot of the equipment out in the field, even in the office. And so you have to have an access to that expertise, and a way to involve talent from the workforce is to recruit them and to make sure that they're recognized and rewarded for that participation. It's not just add on another piece of their job, but have it recognized with management that this is a part of their job to help managing the development and the delivery of the training. And a way to do that is that the people that you select for that would be the experts. They would be the organizational experts, and that helps recognize and reward them for that. Also, they would be evaluated on contributing to that process.
Another one for you is why attention management is the essential productivity skill in today's high-tech workplace.
Okay, ask that just once more.
Why attention management is the essential productivity skill in today's high technology workplace.
A productivity skill in today's okay, I'm not familiar with the term attention management, but in terms of high-tech central productivity, why attention management? What I would say that in terms of whether you're developing training for an industrial setting, or whether you're developing training in a high-tech arena, or you're developing training in an office arena, the various arenas, from my perspective, don't matter much as to how you approach the development of the training. What matters is the specifics of what the person does in that job. So in a high-tech job, they're going to do high-tech work. So the competencies need to be closely associated with that high-tech work. And there may be a lot more comprehension elements to the competencies in high-tech work, particularly if it's getting into the design of circuitry and things like that. So as far as these essentials that I've talked about here with the training program, they're going to apply regardless of what type of program or what the arena that you're developing the program is, whether it's high-tech or whether it's not high-tech. It's just that once you pin down the specifics of what the task is, then that drives what the competencies are. And those tasks are going to be quite different in a high-tech arena than they would in a out in the oil field type of environment.
Another one for you is how could we measure the success of our training program?
Okay, that you do that in a similar manner to measuring the success of the training itself. You measure the success of the training itself by measuring whether someone has acquired the competencies that you want them to acquire by the evaluations. So in a similar manner, you would evaluate the training program, and it's useful to establish the criteria for your evaluation up front as part of the development of the training program. You'd want to sit down with management and say, what do I want my training program to do? What do I want it to accomplish? And those are the things then that you're going to evaluate it on. So in a similar manner, as you would say, what do I want this employee to be able to do? You say, what do I want this training program to be able to do? And you define evaluation criteria and evaluation tools that would address that. So it's a very similar process.